Totemist. The girl in the Navy uniform. It was nearly 11 p.m. or so when I finally finished work at the office. Another draining day of meetings, deadlines, and putting out fires. The kind that leaves you feeling like a shell of yourself by the time you say goodbye to your colleagues. Usually, I'd take the last train home, but my mind was too cluttered with thoughts. So I decided a walk might help clear my head before returning to my apartment. There's this small neighborhood park I pass on my way home, typically filled with elementary school students in their Navy uniforms and mothers chatting on benches. A peaceful pocket of life amid the concrete city. But at this hour, it was deserted, with only the soft glow of lanterns along the path, casting shadows through the trees, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. As I rounded a bend near an old ginkgo tree, I noticed a small figure sitting on one of the wooden benches, a tiny frame in a school uniform with long black hair falling forward. As I got closer, I realized it was a young girl, perhaps second or third grade, sitting alone without anyone else. I felt worried about her and tried to carefully approach her. You know, not to startle her. I asked in a gentle voice if she was all right, if she needed any help. She barely lifted her head, keeping her eyes downcast in that distinctly reserved way, and replied in a flat, emotionless voice that she was waiting for her mother, who would return soon. I offered to wait with her, but she shook her head slightly, still avoiding eye contact, and murmured that she was fine. I asked how long she'd been waiting and if her mother had mentioned when she'd return. The girl just gave a slight shrug, whispering that she didn't know, that her mother did this quite often, leaving her places and taking a long time to come back. I suggested we walk together to look for her mother nearby, and with another small shrug, she slid off the bench and fell into step beside me. We walked quietly for a while, following the stone path deeper into the park. I kept glancing at the girl, trying to figure out her state of mind, but her face remained still, like a no mask, as she stared ahead while walking. Finally, I broke the silence, asking her name. She said it was Yuri, then fell silent again as we walked. I asked about her hobbies, school, and if she lived in the neighborhood. Simple questions to understand her situation. But Yuri's answers were vague. She said she didn't attend school anymore, and that they moved frequently. But then I asked about her uniform. If she wasn't going to school, why was she wearing it? She tugged at the navy collar of her sailor-style uniform, the pleats of her skirt swishing as she walked. "Mom makes me wear it," she said, her cold fingers running over the school crest, which had been removed and sewn back on many times. I started to say something else when Yuri suddenly froze, her body tensing as she stared ahead. I followed her gaze and saw a tall, thin woman rushing toward us. Her long, messy hair hung loose, nothing like the tidy look most mothers had, and her sharp eyes locked onto Yuri. As she got closer, the flaws in her skin, teeth, and clothes became clearer. She looked like she hadn't bathed in a long time. "What are you doing here?" the woman snapped, her voice cutting through the quiet park like a blade. "I told you to stay where you were, you ungrateful child." Yuri remained silent, face still blank, as the woman's eyes darted to me, her lips curling with disgust. "And who are you?" she demanded. "Why are you talking to my daughter?" The woman's hostility made the hairs on my neck stand up. I've never been good at handling people yelling at me. It always makes my knees go weak, my chest tight. I tried to take a deep breath, but it caught in my throat, like I was sinking underwater. Still, I forced myself to speak, keeping my voice as steady as I could. I told her I had found Yuri sitting alone and got worried, that I just wanted to make sure she was okay. The woman let out a harsh, almost mocking laugh, her eyes looking at me with unsettling intensity. Of course you were. I know what people like you want. Stay away from my daughter. She grabbed Yuri's arm and yanked it, nearly lifting her off her feet. It hit me hard to see how the girl barely reacted, as if she'd experienced this before. They turned and started walking away from me. I could feel myself shaking, but I forced myself to take a step forward. The moment I did, the woman spun around so fast, her free hand balling into a fist. "Back off!" she screamed, her voice full of fury. I froze for a second, then stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. I was sure she was going to hit me. My hand scrambled through my bag, fumbling for the small can of pepper spray I always kept with me. My fingers were trembling so badly that I almost dropped it. But finally, I gripped it tightly. I glanced up. She was still staring me down, her chest rising and falling with each breath, pure rage in her eyes. I pointed the spray at her, my voice shaking as I told her to let go of Yuri. She snarled at me, but when she saw the can, she loosened her grip. Yuri didn't move, didn't say anything, even though I could see the marks on her arm from her mother's hold. My mind raced. Part of me wanted to run, but I didn't want to leave Yuri. Still, I knew pushing things could make it worse for both of us. So I backed away, keeping the spray pointed at her, trying to sound confident even though I didn't feel it. I told her I'd call the police, but she didn't seem to care. The woman spat curses at me but didn't move, seemingly held back by the pepper spray, for now. I turned and hurried away. I forced myself not to look back, though the worry for Yuri weighed on me. Once I was back in my apartment, I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained what happened. Finding Yuri, her mother's behavior, and my concern for her safety. The dispatcher assured me they would look into it. I spent hours pacing my small apartment, ashamed of my cowardice and not doing more. The guilt was so overwhelming I started crying in frustration. I considered returning to check if the police had responded, but couldn't bring myself to leave. When I called the police the next morning, desperate for news, the officer had no record of my report. They searched their files repeatedly, but found no mention of a girl in the park. No mother and daughter matching my description. The officer's tone even had a hint of doubt, as though questioning my story. I hung up without another word. I couldn't explain it, but I knew what I'd seen. Knew Yuri had been real. Yet there was no trace of her or her mother, and with no evidence, the police clearly thought I was confused or lying. Weeks have passed, and I can't forget the memory of that night, of Yuri's empty eyes and lifeless voice, and her mother's pure malice. I find myself searching for them everywhere, scanning faces at convenience stores, hoping to glimpse Yuri, to know she's safe. But there's been nothing, no sign of either of them. I don't know what to do anymore. All I know is that Yuri is out there somewhere, probably still trapped with that cruel woman she calls mother. And the thought of what might be happening to her, of those shuttered, lifeless eyes, haunts me day after day. I failed her that night in the park, failed to protect her when she needed someone most. The Wrong Side of Tokyo. That first night in the hotel, I kept waking up to these weird scratching sounds, like someone was dragging furniture across the floor above me, but it was too rhythmic to be random. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. Sometimes it would stop for just long enough that I'd start to drift off, and then it would start again, slightly louder, slightly closer. Around 4 a.m., I heard someone whisper something in Japanese right outside my door, followed by soft laughter that faded down the hallway. The next day, I ventured into Tokyo proper, and that's when reality really started to crack. Everyone talks about how crowded Tokyo is, but they don't tell you how it feels to be completely alone in that crowd. Thousands of people rush past you like you're invisible, all of them perfectly synchronized in their morning commute, while you stumble around like a glitch in their system. The trains were the worst. Watching businessmen in identical suits slide into their designated spots with mechanical precision, while I stood there sweating, obviously foreign, obviously lost. There was this moment where I caught my reflection in the window, and for a split second, I didn't recognize myself. I looked distorted somehow, like my features had been slightly rearranged while I wasn't paying attention. I spent most of the day in my head, second-guessing every interaction. Should I try that ramen place? What if they don't want foreigners? Is everyone staring at me, or am I imagining it? The city felt like it was actively rejecting me, like an immune system attacking a foreign body. Even the vending machines seemed hostile, their cheerful jingles feeling more like mockery than welcome. I tried to visit some of the places I'd seen in anime, Akihabara and Harajuku, expecting to feel that same excitement. But instead, I found myself swallowed by the crowds, the noise, the sheer intensity of it all. Massive screens flashed endless ads, music blasted from every storefront, and people surged around me in every direction. It should have been thrilling, but instead, it felt off, almost staged, like I was watching it all from inside a bubble, disconnected from the energy around me. The crowd started to get to me in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the physical presence of so many bodies. It was the weight of all their ignored glances, the pressure of their deliberate non-acknowledgement. Every time I accidentally made eye contact with someone, they'd look away so quickly, it felt like a small rejection. After a chaotic day, evening came, and I decided to check out Shinjuku Golden Gai. You know, those narrow alleys full of tiny bars that every travel blog raves about. What they don't mention is how many places have no foreigners signs, or how the ones that do let you in charge prices that make Manhattan look cheap. The hosts outside some bars were weirdly aggressive, grabbing my arm and trying to pull me inside while rattling off drink specials in broken English. Their smiles never reached their eyes, and their hands felt too cold, like they'd been standing in a freezer. The alleyways between the bars were barely wide enough for one person, and the neon signs above created shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. It made me feel like something was about to grab me from behind. But every time I turned around, there was just another salesman stumbling home, or a group of tourists looking as lost as I felt. I'd had enough. I just wanted to get back to my hotel. But of course, I got lost again. Ended up in Kabukicho, which was like walking into the neon-lit backstage of a circus where all the clowns had gone bad. That's where I saw two guys with elaborate tattoos peeking out from under their collars. Like an idiot, I stared. I was fascinated by the intricate designs, and the way they seemed to move under the flickering signs. In the harsh red neon light, the dragons and demons on their skin looked almost alive. I didn't realize they were chimperas, wannabe yakuza, until one of them caught me looking. He nudged his friend, said something in rapid Japanese that made them both laugh, and there was this shift in the air, like when a room suddenly goes cold. They started walking toward me with this deliberate slowness. I remember trying to stammer out an apology. Sumimasen, I didn't mean to, but the words died in my throat when I saw their expressions up close. There was this emptiness in their eyes, like they were looking through me rather than at me. The first punch caught me completely off guard, landing somewhere between my shoulder and neck. I remember thinking how weird it was that it didn't hurt at first. Just felt like a heavy push, like my brain couldn't process what was happening. Then the pain hit like a delayed explosion, and they were already throwing more punches. They took turns, almost casual about it, like they were playing a game. One of them kept making fun of my clothes. My tourist uniform, he called it in broken English, pointing at my anime t-shirt between punches. The shirt had characters from Naruto on it. I'd thought it would be a good conversation starter. Now, it felt like wearing a sign that said, "Please hurt me." I could taste blood, and the neon signs above us started to blur together into this sick kaleidoscope of colors. The strange thing about being beaten is how your mind starts to wander. I remember noticing how clean their shoes were, how one of them had a small mole under his left eye that twitched every time he pulled back his fist. The pain became almost abstract, like it was happening to someone else, and I was just watching from somewhere far away. The sounds of the city never stopped. People walking past the alley, music from nearby clubs, and train announcements in the distance. Life just continued around us like nothing was happening. I don't know how long it went on. Time gets weird when you're being beaten. Could have been minutes, but it felt like hours. Then someone shouted something, and suddenly they stopped. I saw another figure, older, better dressed. He was the one who said something that made my attackers back off. They left me there on the dirty pavement, laughing about teaching a foreigner a lesson. As they walked away, I noticed that their tattoos seemed different somehow, less like art and more like wounds in their skin that had been filled with ink to stop the bleeding. I lay there for what felt like forever, trying to remember if 911 worked in Japan, realizing I had no idea what their emergency number was. The thought hit me then. My existence could end right here, in this alley, and the crowds would just keep flowing around me like water around a stone. No one would even notice. At that moment, I understood something about Japan that no amount of anime or travel blogs could have taught me. This place had its own rules, its own reality, and I had been arrogant to think I could just step into it like a tourist attraction. Except someone did notice. I heard a woman scream, this high-pitched, theatrical sound that seemed so out of place it almost made me laugh. Then there were sirens, paramedics speaking rapid Japanese, and finally darkness. The last thing I remember before passing out was looking up at the Tokyo sky and realizing you couldn't see any stars through the neon haze. I spent a month in a Japanese hospital instead of the 2 weeks I had planned for my vacation. The nurses were professional, but distant, like they were tending to a piece of furniture that happened to be bleeding. Dealing with my insurance company became its own nightmare. They spent weeks questioning every charge, disputing the necessity of my extended hospital stay, and arguing about coverage for treatment in a foreign country. The hospital room had the same smell as the hotel elevator, and sometimes at night, I'd hear that same rhythmic scratching sound from somewhere in the building. When I asked about it, the night nurse just smiled and adjusted my IV. When I finally made it back home, the first thing I did was gather up all my anime figures, my manga collection, my Japanese street fashion clothes, everything I'd collected over years of dreaming about Japan, and dumped it all in the donation bin at Goodwill. I couldn't look at any of it anymore without feeling sick. Even my favorite anime series now felt like elaborate lies, beautiful stories hiding ugly truths. The worst part? It's not the physical pain, the medical bills, or even the nightmares where I'm wandering through endless Tokyo alleys that keep rearranging themselves behind me. It's that they took something from me that I can never get back. That sense of wonder, that belief in a place I'd built up in my mind for so long. Sometimes I catch myself checking my reflection in windows, just to make sure my features are still arranged the way I remember them. I guess sometimes dreams should stay dreams, and some places aren't meant to exist anywhere except in your imagination. 12% battery life. I'm from Michigan, a place where hockey's basically a religion, but I never really got into it. Honestly, I never really understood the whole mindset and people here. I didn't love my hometown either. The winters were brutal, and if you ask me to name 3 fun things to do in my hometown, I couldn't come up with a single one. Maybe it was because I didn't have many friends, and the few I did have went off to college elsewhere. So, I spent most of my time on my own or hanging out with my mom, which definitely wasn't how I pictured my 20s. One night, at around 2 a.m., I was watching a YouTuber talk about her time in Kyoto, how living there completely shifted her perspective, how grateful she felt for the city and the people, and how it helped her find a place where she truly belonged. I remember watching that and thinking, that's exactly what I want from life. I needed a change, and it hit me. The next few hours were a blur of Japanese travel vlogs and study abroad testimonials. By sunrise, I had my notes full of scribbled ideas and a browser history that was basically a crash course in Japanese culture. I was trying to find ways to get to Japan without blowing all the money I'd saved up from my cafe job. And when I found out my university had an exchange program with Hirosaki University, it felt like fate. A semester abroad seemed perfect for pushing me out of my comfort zone and trying something completely new. Sure, Hirosaki wasn't as exciting as Kyoto, but it was either this or staying home with my mom, watching Gilmore Girls for like the millionth time. Looking back now, I wish I'd actually paid attention to all those safety protocols I'd researched so carefully. For the most part, my time in Hirosaki was amazing. Everything was going so well. Like, seriously, I couldn't have asked for better. I clicked right away with my roommates, 3 Japanese girls who taught me how to make real ramen, not the instant stuff, and helped me figure out the crazy Tokyo subway system whenever we took long weekend trips there. I was crushing my classes and even picked up enough Japanese to order food and chat with this sweet older lady who ran the convenience store by our apartment. But I really wanted to improve my Japanese even more, since I was starting to imagine myself staying here longer term. So, I used an app called Tandem Talk to find someone to practice with. And that's how I met Akira. Looking at his profile now, all the little details that made him seem perfect were right there. his fluent English from living in Seattle, his architecture studies at Todai, which I later found out is what everyone calls the University of Tokyo. And this way, he had of making every message feel like we were already old friends. He told me he was currently living in Aomori, that's close to Hirosaki, and how he finds the city perfect. He would write these long, super interesting messages about Aomori's architecture and what it said about the culture, or share these relatable stories about his culture shock moments in America. We messaged for 2 or 3 weeks before deciding to meet up, and during that time, he never got weird or pushed me to share anything personal. He was just really patient and respectful, and he seemed genuinely excited about sharing our cultures. At first, planning our meetup seemed like the natural next step. He suggested Aomori for our first meeting. I was so excited about the idea of exploring it that I didn't notice how he slowly started taking control of all the plans. Looking back now, I can see how this was when things started feeling off. The red flags started small, so small I could easily brush them off. First, he insisted on picking me up instead of meeting at the restaurant. When I suggested meeting in public, he had this whole explanation about how the place he wanted to take me was hard to find, hidden in one of Aomori's food alleys, and he didn't want me to get lost. It made sense at the time. I was still getting lost, trying to find my way to the grocery store some days. Then he kept changing where we were going to meet. First, it was this popular ramen place. Then he switched to a sushi restaurant, and finally, it ended up being this tiny izakaya in some random back alley I'd never heard of, way outside downtown Aomori. Each time he changed it, he had a decent excuse. The ramen place was too packed on Fridays. His friend said the sushi place wasn't good anymore, and this izakaya had the most authentic experience. I think by doing this, he was testing me to see how much I'd just go along with whatever he said. When we finally met, I remember seeing his car and getting confused. It was this sleek black Toyota that just didn't add up for a student, you know? Like, it was way too nice, though I couldn't tell you exactly what model it was. The car was weirdly empty, like pristine empty. No crumpled receipts in the cup holders, no loose change rolling around, not even one of those little trees hanging from the mirror. It just had this super clean, almost sterile smell, like someone had just gone crazy with cleaning supplies. For a car he'd supposedly had for years, it felt more like one of those rental cars you're scared to even eat a snack in. The evening started okay, I guess, if you ignore how he kept ordering more sake, even though I said I didn't want any more. The izakaya was small, with maybe 8 seats at the counter and 2 tiny tables, with yellowed posters of old Japanese movies on the walls, and an ancient TV playing a baseball game with the sound off. We were the only customers, which he said was normal for a weeknight. But the way the old man behind the counter avoided making eye contact with me didn't feel welcoming. Akira asked about my family, normal first date stuff at first, but then the question shifted into unsettling territory. He wanted to know if anyone knew I was on this date, if I lived alone, and what time my classes ended each day. Then he started talking about how Japanese women were too traditional and how he preferred American girls because we're more adventurous and carefree. With each question, my discomfort grew deeper as I noticed this unsettling intensity in his eyes that reminded me of nature documentaries I'd watched about predators stalking their prey. As time went on, he started getting way more handsy. Like, He kept closing that gap between us until we were basically shoulder to shoulder. And he'd keep finding these accidental ways to touch my arms or play with my hair. I was stuck in this total mental back and forth. Yeah, he was hot, but those weird questions from earlier had my gut feeling all kinds of wrong. His looks couldn't make up for that pit in my stomach. I glanced at my phone and told him I needed to head back to study, especially since the train to Hirosaki would take forever. But he just laughed and poured me another drink, insisting tomorrow can wait. After that, he started telling me about his collection. He never actually said what he collected, just that he kept it in his apartment and that it was very special and how he'd love to show it to me. The way his eyes changed when he talked about it made me even more uncomfortable. It was like watching someone become a completely different person right in front of me. His English, which had been perfect all evening, started getting weird, and he'd phrase things just slightly off in a way that felt super threatening. Instead of, "you should see it," he'd say, "you will see it," with this practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Around 11 p.m., after what felt like years of trying to find a way to leave politely, because even then I was still worried about being rude, he finally said he needed to use the bathroom. He left his jacket on his chair and told me to wait right here, in a voice that didn't sound anything like the casual tone he'd been using all night. As soon as he disappeared around the corner, I grabbed my purse and bolted. I didn't know the area at all, and my phone was almost dead. Just 12% battery left. I pulled up Google Maps while speed walking, trying to figure out how to get back to the train station. That's when I heard him shouting my name from behind me. The way he said it, like he was calling a disobedient dog, made me start running. But I was wearing these stupid little heels that kept catching in the cracked pavement, and the streets all looked the same, narrow and dark, with these identical vending machines glowing like lonely guardians. I ended up in some kind of industrial area with warehouses and narrow alleys between them. My phone died, right as I heard his footsteps getting closer, and the sound echoed off the metal buildings in a way that made it impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. I ducked behind some crates, trying not to breathe too loud, and that's when I heard him talking. Not shouting anymore, but this weird, sing-song voice saying how he just wanted to show me something special, and how I was being very rude by running away. The most terrifying thing wasn't his behavior. It was watching my own mind scramble to make excuses for it. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he really did just want to show me some stupid collection of manga or action figures. Maybe I was being paranoid and making a scene over nothing. But then I heard him getting closer, and he was laughing now, this horrible little giggle that made me think of those horror movies where the killer thinks everything is just hilarious. That's when I realized this wasn't the first time he'd done this. He was too calm, too practiced. He knew exactly what he was doing. I took my shoes off and held them, trying to move as quietly as possible between the warehouses. Every time I thought I was getting somewhere, I'd hit another dead end. The whole time, I could hear him moving around, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always talking in that terrible, playful voice about how we could still salvage the evening if I'd stop being difficult. He started mixing Japanese and English, and though my Japanese wasn't great, I understood enough to make me run faster. He was talking about his collection again, about how perfect I'd look as part of it. I don't know how long I was out there. It felt like hours, but was probably only 45 minutes or so. The industrial district was like a maze, and every time I thought I'd found a way out, I'd end up back among the warehouses. My feet were bleeding from running barefoot on the rough pavement, and I kept thinking about how in horror movies, they always find the victim by following the blood trail. Finally, I saw the lights of a gas station in the distance. I ran toward it, not caring any more if he heard me. Akira started sprinting after me, screaming that he was going to beat me if I didn't listen to him. The rage in his voice was different this time, raw and uncontrolled in a way that sent pure adrenaline through my body. As I ran, my mind kept spinning between, this can't be real, and holy shit, this is actually happening. I could barely breathe, trying to sprint while fighting back tears of pure terror. Every time I stumbled on something, my heart would stop for a second thinking, this is it, he's got me. But somehow, my luck held out. I managed to burst into the station literally seconds before his hand could grab my arm. The guy working at the gas station took one look at me, some crazy foreign girl with mascara all over her face and bloody feet, and immediately locked the door behind me and called the police. He didn't speak much English, but he gave me a bottle of water and some paper towels to clean my feet. I kept trying to explain about Akira, mixing up my limited Japanese with English, probably not making any sense, but the guy just nodded and pointed to the security cameras, making me feel a little safer. The police arrived faster than I expected, but their search around the gas station turned up nothing. Akira had disappeared. When they backtracked to the izakaya, the staff swore they'd never seen anyone matching his description, and the old man behind the counter insisted he'd been alone all evening except for some regulars. I pulled up Tandem Talk to show them his profile, but of course, his account had vanished completely. Every trace of him had disappeared like smoke. I finished my semester in Hirosaki, but I barely left my apartment except for classes. My roommates practically had to drag me out to get groceries. They were amazing, actually. They took turns walking me to and from campus, helped me file a police report, and didn't complain when I insisted on keeping all the windows locked, even during the hottest part of summer. Sometimes, I would check that language exchange app, looking for his profile under different names, but I never found anything that seemed like him. I'm back home now, trying to put my life back together, but I can't handle being alone in public places, especially at night. My therapist says I'm making progress, but sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel normal again. The worst part is not knowing who he really was, what his collection really meant, or if he's still out there somewhere, looking for other girls to add to it.